Warm greetings to all of you from India. I'm Arpit Waghmare, coordinator of Operation Nehemiah in India, which is a holistic movement for financial integrity in churches and mission organizations. I'm honored also to be a part of the Global Integrity Network as well as the Faith and Public Integrity Network. It is a privilege for me to be sharing at this conference on such an important topic, integrity at all costs. We've just heard a wonderful talk from my dear friend and colleague at FPIN, Martin Alabi, on how Christians can make a difference in public spaces. An important related question that probably comes up for us is, as we dream of transforming the world, do we have our own house in order as the church? Reminds me of the scripture in Romans 2, 21 onwards. It says, "You then who teach others, do you not teach yourself? You who preach against stealing, do you steal? You who say that people should not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? You who abhor idols, do you rob temples? You who boast in the law, do you dishonor God by breaking the law? As it is written, God's name is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you." These painful words are often true of the church in my beloved country, India. Christians in India make about 2.3% of the massive population in this country, but the assets the church in India owns does not reflect this proportion. The church, in fact, is the second largest landowner in India after the government of India. Now, how did this happen? India was colonized by the British for about 400 years. During the British rules, missionaries who came along with the British set up multiple institutions which continued to own their properties after the British left in 1947. Now, in the 1960s and 70s, with the British gone, many of these missionaries were forced out of the country and therefore had to hand over those institutions to local leadership. As a result, you can do the math. A small percentage of people ended up with a large proportion of the real estate in India. Now, this article that states that the Catholic Church in India is the second largest landowner after the Indian government. The property portfolio of the Catholic Church is equivalent to the Indian Navy's annual budget. That's quite something. While the Catholic Church is the largest, the Protestant institutions in India are no mean size themselves. I was recently told by a fairly reliable source that the budget last year available to a single bishop in just one diocese in a Protestant denomination was in the range of $100 million. It might be said that the quality of leaders that were given charge of these institutions all those decades ago was of a fairly good standard. We have some evidence of this from the writings of some of these great men and women that we now read. But over time, there is a sense that there has been a deterioration in the quality of leadership. The sheer control over high value assets that came with these leadership roles attracted more and more leaders with the wrong priorities and questionable character. This created a decay in the system, and it has become more and more difficult for people of character to be appointed to positions of leadership, for the simple reason that getting elected or appointed requires high campaign costs, including money required for lobbying and in general for buying votes. Therefore, these elections are funded by vested interests, and you can imagine those appointed are beholden to those vested interests, compromising their freedom to wholeheartedly put Christ first above all else. Sadly, the elections for the role of senior functionaries in most of our large denominations often closely resemble any regular civic election, with lobbies and negotiation and manipulation of the system. The Operation Nehemiah movement is a holistic movement for financial integrity. We are looking to rebuild the broken walls of the church in India in this area, and we want to do it by enabling and building good leaders. The reason we use the word holistic is because we believe that stronger governance on its own will not solve the financial integrity problem. Good governance has to go hand in hand with a spiritual anchoring around God instead of money, and values and culture that reflect this anchoring, and importantly, people of character and competence who embody and model this anchoring and values. Recently, the American Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability, the ECFA, an accreditation body for Christian organizations in the US, introduced a new requirement into their accreditation process to address the integrity and character of a ministry's leaders. It's called the biggest change to ECFA standards in 45 years. First introduced in March of this year, the proposed standard states every organization shall proactively care for its leader and support the integrity of its leader in conformity with ECFA's policy for excellence in supporting leadership integrity. ECFA has done some great work, but it now sounds a lot more like Operation Nehemiah and a lot more like what Martin spoke about in his talk. We need heart transplants. I have a wonderful, happy story to share with you about a heart transplant exercise that led to a few $1 million getting released into the kingdom. Two Christian organizations were involved in a real estate development that was meant to raise funds for one of them. In the middle of this, vested interests led to a breakdown of relationships between the two boards, and a power struggle ensued. Court cases were filed, and even though the development was complete, the final registration was held up because of these disagreements and cases. This situation dragged on for more than a decade with no sight of a resolution, and it looked quite hopeless. Operation Nehemiah got involved in a 3-year process of relationship rebuilding between these key stakeholders and removing operational bottlenecks one by one. The great news is that just 2 months back, I want to share with you, on the 30th of March, all parties amicably completed a transaction that released $2.6 million for kingdom work. God is at work, transforming hearts. Coming back to the Protestant church, there are sad stories that betray compromises of financial integrity. Just about a couple of years ago, the church in India, she had to hide her head in shame when the spiritual head of a church denomination was caught and held by authorities on charges ranging from money laundering to diverting funds for personal use. What good can come out of such a situation, one could ask? Or maybe, is this the way that God draws urgent attention to the ugliness that is perpetrated by those who are called by his name? As a result of this unfortunate event, the general body of the National Council of Churches in India mandated their secretariat to address issues concerning financial integrity in churches and Christian organizations and institutions. Which is why when we as Operation Nehemiah approached them in November last year with a proposal to partner, they welcomed us with open arms. Since then, Operation Nehemiah has collaborated with the NCCI for multiple events with church and institutional heads, and we have an ongoing governance-related project, all leading up to a national level event in November of this year. Hopefully, all of this should trigger off a wave of initiatives towards building financial integrity in our institutions. God is at work. He is creating a sense of urgency in India, bringing back our leaders and our institutions to his expectations of holiness. There is more to share with you, but I'll stop here. I know some of what I shared can tend to be depressing, but I do hope that you're encouraged that God is indeed at work.